Even the courts legislate. We don't live within the confines of the Constitution, and unless we do, we will continue in this process. Go to war that are undeclared, spend money that we don't have, print the money that we don't have. But we have to change our appetite for big government. We have to ask the questions the founders asked. What should the role of government be in a free society? And they came up with the conclusion that it should be very, very limited. We'll write restraints on the federal government and say you can't do this. The Constitution was written precisely to restrain the federal government, although they wanted the colonies to come together in one unit. And at the same time, they wanted to restrain the government. They wanted to put no restraints on the people. But unfortunately, we have gone in the wrong direction, especially in the last 100 years, and especially since 1971. But the time has come that it's very evident something dramatic has happened in the last 4 or 5 years. Although there's been several of us talking about this for a long time, the dramatic revelation occurred with this collapse of the economy, with this suicidal approach of just spending money and not cutting anything and printing money and think it's going to work forever. We had an economic crisis come upon us because we had too much government, too much spending, too much debt, too much taxation, too much regulation, too many wars. And what do? They try to solve the problems with doing exactly the same thing. It's not going to work, and that's why we have to change our direction. In Washington, they talk a little bit about the budget, but they do nothing. They talk about cutting spending, but they don't. They're not telling the truth. They're talking about, you know, the Congress couldn't do it, the super committee couldn't do it, so they turned it over to an automatic cut of $1 trillion over 10 years. Automatic cut on the automatic increases of $10 trillion. They're going to cut $1 trillion out of the increases, and they call that a radical cut, an extreme cut, and they're fighting each other on trying to prevent which cuts are going to happen. That's $100 billion a year of cutting only proposed increases. Our national debt is going up $100 billion every month. So my solution, or at least the beginning of the solution, is to cut the budget by $1 trillion in 1 year. Nervous about the government not spending the money, but I'll tell you what, don't get nervous if the government would quit spending $1 trillion. They don't know how to spend the money. It's always spent politically. They do the wrong things, and we get hit twice. They take it from us. That's one hit. Then when they spend it, all they do is come down hard on us with more regulation. So there's nothing wrong with this whole economic moral principle of saying that you have the right to spend the money. You spend $1 trillion, and you spend it your way, not the way of the politicians. This can be defended on constitutional grounds and moral grounds and economic grounds, that the politicians and the bureaucrats are not smart enough to know how to spend your money. And it's based on the principle of individual liberty. We get our rights in a natural way, or a God-given right. We get our life and we get our liberty. And we ought to be able to keep the fruits of our labor under those circumstances. Therefore, instead of thinking cutting government spending by $1 trillion is a detriment, it's a blessing, it's a help. It would be spent, the money would be spent more wisely. And the allocation of credit would be the same thing. Today, the Federal Reserve does everything to say that they will allocate credit to their friends in the bubble formation and to their friends when the bubble bursts and they need their bailout. At the same time, individuals, middle-class people, people who don't want to speculate in the stock market, and they want to assume responsibility and save money. So what do? They put their money in a CD. And Bernanke literally laughs at people and says, well, the fact that they only get 1 or 2%, that's unfortunate, but we have to take care of those who are going to stimulate the economy and give the money to the bankers. So what we need, the allocation of credit should come from the marketplace, and the people should be encouraged to say, but there's no encouragement today. What do? They take money and say we're going to take care of the elderly when they retire and we're going to have Social Security benefits. At the same time, they're wishing for, and they deliberately debase the currency, which is a moral and economic issue. So the people receiving benefits right now, are they keeping up with the cost of living? No, they're losing. But if you ask Bernanke and crew over there, they say, oh no, inflation is only 1 or 2%, don't worry about it. But what if your inflation is 6 or 8%? Somebody's stealing from you. It's theft. The founders called it counterfeiting. But because the government is too big, we have to ask a couple of questions. We have to ask, once again, what should the role of government be? Should it be to operate in an entitlement system? A lot of people in this country have come to believe that entitlements is equivalent to having a right. And we should sort that all out. You have a right to your life in a natural way. You don't get your life or your liberties from the government. You get them in a natural way. And we should say that the entitlement system is not a moral right. Entitlement means the government's going to give you something for free. Oh, the government can give you free education, free food, free housing, free medical care. But where does the government get it? They've never produced a thing. The only thing the government can do is steal it from productive individuals and give it to another one. It's totally destructive. Where we have a right to our own life and should have the right to the products of our labor, you don't have a right to your neighbor's wealth. You can't go in and steal from your neighbor just because they have more than you do. But you shouldn't have the right to send a politician or a congressman to go into your neighbor's house and take what they have because you want it. It's not right. It's not fair. And it doesn't work. But if we want to give those who want the redistribution of wealth, the benefit of the doubt, many of them are well motivated. They really care about the poor, and they don't understand economics. They don't understand how government destroys the production of wealth. So they really want to help people. And take, for instance, the housing. Well, it's nice. Everybody should have a house, even if they can't afford it. You know, so they devise a system, print a lot of money, pass out the money, have affirmative action programs. You force banks to give loans to people who don't qualify, and then you give special benefits to organizations like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, where their executives make hundreds of millions of dollars, and then everybody will get a house. And the number of people who had houses actually went up. But also there were a lot of people making a lot of money on this. The people who were churning the credit, the people in the mortgage markets, the people in the building trades, the people that got into the derivatives business, and they were doing great. And the houses kept going up in prices. It sounded like a perpetual money machine. And how could it ever go wrong? The people could keep borrowing against these rising prices, except for one thing. Austrian free market economics knew exactly what was going on. They understood it clearly and said, it will not last. This is an artificial bubble created by the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Congress, and it would collapse, and it did. Characteristic of systematic debasement of a currency, if that's all you are dealing with is just debasement of a currency and devaluations, the middle class suffers, the wealthy benefits because there's a transfer of wealth. The people in the middle class get to use the money last, and that's when it has less value, and prices go up and they pay the inflation tax. But the people who get the money first, the government, the politicians who get to use it, big business and big banks, the military-industrial complex, they get to use the money first, so they have an advantage. But what happens when the bubble collapses? Because they are so in charge, because the special interests have so much charge of the monetary system and the system of our foreign policy, they will yell and scream and they say, there's a depression coming, there's a depression coming, we need bailout, if you don't do this, we'll have a depression. And they were right about one thing. There would have been a depression for the rich people. They would have gone bankrupt, but instead, they got the bailouts and we got the bankruptcy. So the middle class bore the burden of assuming the debt, and the big banks got bailed out. But it's still in process. They still want to do this. The only limiting factor right now is the fact that there's going to be an economic limit to how many dollars can be printed. We did in the bailout, the Congress appropriated $1 trillion. That's getting to be a fair sum of money. But the Fed was involved with $15 or $16 trillion of churning credit and bailing out their friends, domestic and international governments and banks. And they're still in a position to do this, and they're behind the scenes promising Europe, well, we'll be there, the dollar will take care of it. The dollar's and our credit's been devalued once already, it's getting ready to be devalued again. And people are starting to wake up. I said, you can't keep printing money and spending money and run up debt and think you can bail out the world. No more than we can be the policeman of the world. We can't be the financial caretaker of the world either. So we have